Tim Harrison. I'm the Managing Director of Ionic Rare Earths. We're an Australian listed company developing downstream magnet recycling and refining capacity. We've also got a large ionic adsorption clay upstream deposit, which is also part of our strategy. But yeah, very exciting times right now in the rare earth space, Matt.
Oh, it certainly is, Tim, and it's good to see you. So I think it's really kicked off a couple of weeks ago when the US Department of Defense invested into MP Materials. Big numbers, big premiums. What should we make of it?
Look, I think, Matt, this has been bubbling away for some time, and I think since the export restrictions were implemented in April of this year, it's just been a sequence of sort of crescendo events that have sort of led to stark, huge investment or huge paradigm shift in rare earths. I mean, the commitment on floor pricing for NdPr at $110 a kilo, represents probably the best part of 100% premium once you factor in the Chinese VAT. So it's a significant increase in NdPr price. The level and quantum of investment commitment from the US government via the DoD, I think paves the way for these new supply chains to come to the fore.
Well, and obviously Apple, jumping on the bandwagon too. Tell us a bit about that. And what does that do for the market?
Yeah, look, I think again, there's a big signal from the customer base. The customer base now looking to support these new supply chains. Apple announcing the deal last week with MP Materials. I think bodes well for the rest of us looking at ex-Chinese supply, and I think from our perspective, being where we are in magnet recycling, the theme from Apple and MP is really around that recycled material, and I think it goes a long way to sort of underscoring the appetite from certain consumers in advanced manufacturing space for recycled magnet rare earths. So I think again we're smack bang right in the middle of the really exciting place to be at the moment in the magnet rare earth supply chain.
Right, and tell us about the, just sticking with the macro for a little bit longer, if you don't mind. China, obviously they're concerned about leakage, rare earths getting out, rare earth skill sets getting out into the market. They're kind of clamping down on things. That's, I assume, is going to make things even tighter in the West, we'll call it. How do you read that situation? What does it do for companies like you?
Yeah, so if we address just the physical rare earths, and the export restrictions applied to 7 medium and heavy rare earths, of which dysprosium and terbium, 2 heavy rare earths used in magnet production. We make them in Belfast. We've obviously seen a huge increase in the amount of inbound inquiry about not only the DY and TB we intend to make from our commercial recycling facilities, but material we're making now. And so, we're in discussions with a number of groups now about our DY and TB, ex-Chinese capacity now being able to be used in a number of applications. And on the skill set side, again, the focus has been on certainly the investment and the focus from the DoD is about that downstream value addition. Apple's interest is on downstream value addition. The technology, the skill sets we've developed, we do have very unique IP on magnet recycling, producing the separated oxides. So again, I think it further underscores the company's strategy on why we're focusing on downstream, because that's really now the enabler of Western capacity. So it's been a very exciting 3 months for the business, and I think we're just sort of starting to see a lot of upside for the company.
Right, and well, to that point, do you sort of see the MP Materials deals that have been happening? Do you see that as something that you can bring sort of complementary primary products into, or are they now a direct competitor? Have they kind of got a moat around this? And how does it stop you, getting deals, grants, and funding generally?
Yeah, look, I think we've got technology that's hugely complementary. And we've got products that are hugely complementary to the light rare earth dominant products that MP will produce. MP Materials produces, NdPr, right? But if you want to make a magnet to go into sintered application or sintered magnets to go into high-end applications, whether that be electric vehicles, wind turbines, or military defense, you also need the dysprosium and terbium. And that's why we've had a lot of inbound inquiry on the materials that we're making. We're making those high purity oxides that can now be deployed in non-Chinese supply chains.
Right. Okay. Now, the question I actually want to ask is basically, do you think that you can create and establish dedicated US JV refining facility like you've done with Viridian in Brazil? To do that, we better understand, or better help people understand, what have you been doing at Viridian down in Brazil? So maybe just remind people what that is.
Okay. So Viridian is another very exciting opportunity that the company's been developing. That Viridian opportunity is a joint venture between Ionic Rare Earths and Viridis Mining and Minerals. Viridis is developing the Colossus project, which is a large ionic adsorption clay in Poços de Caldas. So it's a very exciting region, high grade ionic adsorption clay, really, exceptional metallurgy. They've just completed a pre-feasibility study. And the joint venture that we have with VMM, Viridian, we'll look at developing a refinery in Brazil to upgrade the mixed rare earth carbonate from Colossus to separated oxides, and also develop magnet recycling. And so the progress that we collectively have been able to achieve through Viridian over the last 6 months has been fantastic. We've recycled magnets we sourced in Brazil. We sent them over to Belfast. We recycled them back into high purity oxides and then delivered those oxides to supply chain partners in Brazil in May this year. So that physical demonstration, not just talking about it, we're doing it. And I think that sort of, again, positions us extremely well with stakeholders in Brazil. And at the moment, collectively with our partners, we're working through the final stages of a substantial capital grant package through the BNDES and FINEP program. And hopefully we're in a position to announce the quantum of that funding, which will then help us develop a rare earth refining and recycling hub in Poços. So, we are receiving a lot of inbound inquiry. And on the back of that technology, also looking at the ability to develop a second refinery or specialized circuits that could be put in the US to separate, whether that be medium or heavy rare earths, in addition to the initial primary separation in Brazil.
Okay, can I just understand? I didn't want to get into that, but can you sort of help a bit more detail on the JV in terms of the costs, revenues, future projection levels of the facility that you're talking about building out here? Because that, I think, will directly affect people's ability to understand what a future expansion into the US could look like. So what's it look like in Brazil today?
Yeah, so at the moment it's greenfield. We're working on scoping studies for refining and recycling. Now, if we talk about the recycling, obviously the recycling scoping study will be a beneficiary of the feasibility study that we've completed for Ionic Technologies in Belfast. Effectively, it's a cookie cutter design. We just basically repeat that study with localized inputs, and that will give us a really strong indication of what the scale of the opportunity, the magnitude of the opportunity on recycling in Brazil looks like, given we're working with a number of groups there, customers that are, again, very keen for recycled oxides. On the primary side, the separation, the refining side, as Ionic, we completed scoping studies on US refining assets in 2023. We have a design, and we'll be now working with Viridian, working with Viridis through Viridian, to update that scoping study based upon the Colossus basket, and aiming to have that completed by later this year, which will give us, class 5 estimate, so plus or minus 50% on the capital and operating costs to build a refinery in Brazil, and produce a substantial amount of not only NdPr but also heavy rare earths.
Okay, I appreciate you kind of go through scoping and so forth, and the Brazilian funding for the Poços de Caldas project is a common, but the build. I'm trying to understand the complexity of the build. Are we talking when you kind of get to the point where you FID? Is that sort of a 2-3 year build out because these things can be complicated, or what learnings have you got from Belfast, say that allow you to sort of understand the build period?
I look on the recycling. That's very quick, and
Okay.
given the appetite on recycling to start producing magnets this year and scaling that up over the course of the next 2 years to an appreciable amount of magnets. We'll be able to rapidly deploy recycling in Brazil. So that will, what we do in Brazil will be a natural beneficiary of all of the work or the school fees that have been paid in Belfast. On the refining side of things, that's going to require a little bit of work. With our technical facility in Brazil, we're developing a pilot plant. We're talking also with some other players in the space, and there's a keen appetite to rapidly expedite what we're doing on refining, given the need for new capacity to unlock material flow into both Northern American and European markets. So again, I think we're in exactly the right space to capitalise on all the work the company's been doing over the last 2 years, 3 years.
Okay, so lots of lessons learned there in terms of being able to kind of mirror that in Brazil. In terms of kind of the permitting component, what exactly is needed, and who's sort of managing that process? Because that could be the long pole in the tent.
Yeah, so if we look at recycling, the permitting requirement on a recycling facility, it's a chemical plant. So it's very fast, it's very quick, and we've started some dialogue with local stakeholders, certainly for our technical facility in Poços. And so we expect that we're going to have an operating facility by late next year. We'll be recycling magnets. We'll be producing separated high purity oxides in Brazil by the end of next year. And that'll be incredibly important for our partners there, looking at building magnets, looking at building domestic capability, and moving pretty swiftly. With the refining side of things, that's a little bit more complex, and we're working through some of the discussions now with local stakeholders, and ultimately will require us also firming up the commercial site location for the larger refinery.
Right, and does Viridian have a license for Brazil, or are there other kind of smaller regional refining and recycling hubs possible in LATAM with others?
So on the recycling side, Viridian has the license for Brazil. So we're open to building as many recycling plants, anywhere around the world. And hence why we're in so many discussions right now with various groups. On the refining side, the agreement that we have with Viridian is that we have a partnership on refining globally, with the exception of Asia and Uganda. So everywhere other than Asia and Uganda, we would be going as Viridian into those markets for recycling, unless we come up with another agreement.
Okay, so obviously with tariffs abound from Mr. Trump, and people not quite understanding the extent of these things, whether raw gets a free ride or processed is taxed up the yin yang. Does that kind of affect your discussions with I guess overseas players trying to import into, say, or export into US markets?
Well, Matt, this week, if we talk about what it means with tariffs, look, it's pretty dynamic, and I think the reality of the situation, this is not about how much I have to pay. This is about, can I get it, right? Because as the supply chain has found over the course of the last sort of 3 months, there ain't much out there, and it's going to cost a lot of money to get it. And I think that's what puts us in a fantastic position. I mean, if we go back, we have a look at some of the discussions that we were having with groups at the end of last year, about things that we sort of needed in order to move forward with commercializing opportunities. I think if we look now at where the macro has changed, what does it look like now? The discussions and propositions that we were putting to these groups at the end of last year now look cheap, right? The reality is this is now a significantly more expensive environment for companies that haven't hedged their supply chain adequately.
Okay. So then that brings us neatly on to the question I wanted to ask earlier, which is about, in terms of plans to establish either dedicated US JV refining facilities and recycling as well, obviously. Have you had any conversations? Are you looking at other options at the moment? Because that is a pretty big market, especially in the context of tariffs, as we just discussed.
Yeah, look, I mean, there's a number of discussions that we're having with groups at the moment. I think, realistically, after the 4th of April, it took some of these companies a little bit of time to understand just how affected their supply chains would be. Fast forward through April, May, there's a bit of urgency. June, a lot of urgency. And now, we're talking with a lot of companies that are looking at how they can at least secure a portion of their supply chain via recycling quickly. What does that cost? And that's an insurance policy, because the reality is that whilst maybe optically restrictions have been relaxed and magnets are flowing, I don't know whether or not the magnets are flowing at the rate that they need to in order to backfill depleted reserves. And the reality is that this will happen again. Anybody who thinks that this won't happen again, I think is probably having a lend of themselves. I think the reality is that the supply chain is fractured. It isn't resilient, and the only way to get resilience is to take a portion of that supply chain in-house.
Okay, well, and I kind of to that end, you've spent time in Belfast on the recycling side, extracting, NdPr and dysprosium, terbium, etc. Are you looking at any other rare earths beyond that? Is there a market for? Are you refining your extraction technologies?
Yes, yeah. So we've also been hit up by other groups. Again, there were 7 elements on the export control restrictions. And so we talk a lot about dysprosium and terbium, and they're 2 elements that are, substantial value in the supply chain. But there are other elements that all come out of China. There were 5 other elements on the export control list that probably don't get anywhere near as much airtime, but are equally critical for military defence applications, but advanced manufacturing. The beauty of our tech is that it can be applied on all of those. And so, we're in discussions with some groups about, alternative supply via recycling for other rare earth elements as well. So, we have a lot of scope not only to scale out the number of facilities on NdPr and DyTb production, but also, targeting these other applications like samarium cobalt, yttrium, other heavy rare earths used in military defence.
Okay, and obviously, I saw you secured $11 million out of the UK government for the supply chain initiative. But again, sticking on the US component, do you think? How do you put yourself in the best position to insert yourself into this kind of US economy so that you can, or your supply chain, in terms of localization, to get government-backed project funding, kind of like MP has just done?
Yeah, look, there's a lot of engagement. I mean, from early this year, Brett Lynch, our chairman, and I have been sort of shuttling back and forward to the US, engaging with stakeholders there in DC and other locations, other groups in the supply chain around, how quickly we can build our capacity on recycling and where we're likely to build that capacity. Part of this is going to require support from government. It's going to require finance. It's going to require funding. We're talking to those groups in the US, along with potential partners on total funding packages, because, we're going to bring the tech, we're going to be able to move quickly, but in order to do that, the rate limiting step is the access to capital. And, I think as we've seen over the last 2 weeks, the US government can deploy capital faster and quicker than anyone. when they've made up their mind, and I think that's what's happening now.
Okay, and let's take it and at scale. It should be added. And let's look at the kind of the market there. How you would go about doing that to obviously kind of get that funding in place. Do you need to have offtake in place? Can you get that feed through from US magnet manufacturers or OEMs? And if so, where are those conversations?
Yeah, look, those discussions are happening behind closed doors, and we continue to explore all the different opportunities with those companies developing capacity right now in the US, but also companies that have aspirations to develop capacity in the US. We've got pretty good visibility on all of the really interesting things that are happening and the things that are unlocked by access to the products that we produce. Recycled oxides, I think, is probably the fastest way for the US to gain access to certainly heavy rare earths, Dy and Tb. And we can do that on the back of what we're doing right now with the technology out of Belfast, facility out of Belfast, and multiple facilities in the US. So I think, we've got a very de-risk strategy, opportunity for stakeholders in the US to get immediate access to the work that's already been done, a plant that can be in production within 2 years in Belfast, and then multiple facilities in the US.
I'm trying to understand what the kind of competitive environment is like in the US, just sticking with the US, and if there's any kind of preferred technologies. I think usually what we see is that in times of desperation, the technology component is secondary to actually getting at these rare earths or whatever the metal may be. So do you feel that your technology has an advantage, or is it really a case of first mover advantage?
Great question, Matt. I think first mover advantage is a big one. Once you've got the recycled materials, and then you realise that you can't make the magnets that you want to make with those other tech, that pretty quickly brings you to us, and I think that's the differentiation. Our ability to produce the separated oxides that enable the magnet manufacturers to be able to put them in the right ratios, the blends to achieve whether it be, heavy rare earth, rich magnets at the alloy, or whether or not they're looking at, grain boundary diffusion, different applications, different manufacturing techniques. We have the products that can enable that. And we have the consistency in the products that we produce from recycling, which are differentiated from certainly what we've seen from our competitors, or not so much competitors, but alternative recycling tech at a very high level. Yeah, I mean, we're differentiated, and the supply chain, the customer base knows it.
Okay, so it's lots of behind closed door meetings and
I mean, there's a lot of meetings.
Pounding the street.
Yeah. There are a lot of meetings and a lot of verification, validation programs. And then as we work through those programs and the quality of our product can be seen by the customer base, then they can start to see the differentiation between what others produce in the recycling space compared to what we produce. And then, that'll be reflected in the magnets that we are ultimately produced from the products we make. And so, we'll start to see EVs with our recycled oxides in them within months.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I'd love to get an update now on sort of what's happening in the UK, because if I look at the kind of the access or options available for finance in the UK is going to be much smaller than, say, somewhere like the US, where there are kind of multiple avenues to go down. So, and governments move at different rates depending on how critical they think critical minerals are. That we're seeing that certainly across Europe and in relation to the US. So, tell us where you're at with the UK before we kind of get onto the kind of maybe the business plan and strategy. So, $11 million recently, good. What else are we waiting for?
£11 million, Matt. So this is
pound. Sorry. Yeah.
Look, I mean that's useful because again, it's a mechanism for us to go and talk about the groups that we're working with on our supply chain. So whether it's working with EMR, the front end of the supply chain, or the customers, beyond Ford, in our Bentley and Wrightbus. There's a few others that we're working with as well. But for this circular economy initiative, and proud of the team and everybody that's had input into securing the financing and the support we've had from the APC, which has been great. It positions us to push forward. Now, as far as the quantum of funding available in other markets, yeah, look, there's probably more funding available in other markets. I mean, but one of the beauties about what we're doing is we don't need much. 85 million sterling will build the first magnet recycling plant in the UK, and it'll be the first domestic capacity on certainly heavy rare earths that the UK's ever had. So it's meaningful, and it provides the molecules that UK supply chain is looking for, not only for automotive but also military and defence. So, with what we're looking for, and the indication on support from the UK government, I believe, we've got the lion's share of funding sort of, we've got a good idea of where that's going to come from, which then means, the allocation coming from Ionic and potentially, investors, and we're talking with lots of groups right now. Certainly great time to be bringing a technology like this to market.
Okay, and do you find, obviously we've talked about this before when the current government first got in, they put out 3 objectives, and one of them seems to kind of hit the mark in terms of what you're trying to do for sure. Has that been kind of followed through? Do you feel, or do you think things have moved slower than you expected? Because the APC is great, ATF is great, but has the money been allocated elsewhere that you're sort of seeing them move at pace, or are they just kind of feeling their way through what is, I guess, a relatively nascent space for them?
Yeah, look, it's been a little bit slower than what we would have liked, but we also appreciate there's quite a lot of paperwork and stuff to get through, because we are a bit of a test case in the first time that funding like this has been deployed by the APC on the supply chain, on the molecules that we're making. So there's been a bit of work, but we've had a lot of support from both the APC and Department of Business and Trade, a lot of positive dialogue. We've got visibility on the progress that's being made. We've had a grant delivery officer appointed to us, and we're working through all of the planning and getting everything ready. And very, very confident that we'll have the grant funding announced hopefully soon. But I mean, it'll take as long as it takes, and we'll piece the rest of the funding puzzle together and be able to pull the trigger as soon as possible.
Okay, so fine. Let's kind of move on to the kind of the model thing, just again for people that have not heard it before. Wherever these JVs may occur in the world, and I appreciate there's lots of conversations going on. You'll let us know when there's something to know. But in terms of the kind of IP transfer or IP protection, can you just explain the kind of licensing model and why the licensing model actually accrues some value for you as a company and therefore your shareholders?
Yeah, so look, Matt, we've been talking with a lot of different groups on how we can work together in whether joint ventures, licensing arrangements, or different opportunities. We're talking about procuring feed material. We're talking about tolling material. And it's really going to be on a case-by-case basis, depending on who the partner is and what the partner's bringing to the table. So there's sort of some of the scenarios, but ultimately, at the end of the day, Ionic wants to be the operator. We want to control the IP, and we want to leverage the IP into, oversight and control on product. And I think that's incredibly important for us as a business, because this is material that, we can put a value on today, but I think that value is only going to increase in time because of the number of applications that are unlocked by access to this material. I mean, all the forecasts on supply and demand have got the appetite or the deficit on the availability of this material, far exceeding anything that can be brought to market. And then if you overlay on top of that the potential demand that comes from robotics, this is industries that are, they've only really come on the scene over the course of the last 5 years, but the impact that's going to have on the overall demand for the materials that we produce is massive. And I have no doubt over the course of the next 5 years, there'll be other initiatives. And I think, again, we're making materials that are very hard to price in today's market.
Yeah, okay. So when you're saying you're negotiating with different parties, you've got to work out what they can bring to the table, and it'll be different in each case. But again, just trying to get back to that kind of value creation component where we can start to understand, well, how does this accrue or build up value for ionic rare earths, right? So deals for maybe, say, future expansion into heavies, say, or the refining, say. On the capex size, for a company of your size, I guess the current model is going to be skewed towards someone with a JV and with a partner with a big balance sheet that can kind of cover that capex for you, and you take a slice of that. Otherwise, the equity dilution is going to be rapid. Or do you think that through offtake agreements that you can get the level of project finance or project debt into something that you want to put forward? How do you kind of view the landscape about building up to a position where you can start accruing greater and greater value down the line? How do you build a company? Where's the growth from?
I think that this is the interesting one. I think rare earths are incredibly strategic products or materials, ingredients, if you want. I see the financing of these opportunities, recycling or refining. Ultimately, the financing for these initiatives will be cornerstoned by government, but then ultimately the customer. The customer will fund it because the customer is turning a product of a defined value into, threefold or magnitudes greater value. I mean, if we look at the cost of the value of the rare earth industry today, it's in the billions, but it's enabling trillions of dollars worth of value-added goods. And when you look at companies that are investing in the supply chain, and case in point, have a look at Apple. Apple has made a bet on MP materials, and I'm sure that what they've spent and committed to that means a lot more to them in revenue for their goods than what they've invested in MP. So I think that that's probably a bit of a signal to the supply chain, to the market. I expect we'll start to see some of these companies with very big balance sheets looking to facilitate new capacity.
Well, it seems to be happening in the uranium space for sure. People, groups, big groups like Google and Meta are moving upstream there to kind of secure their energy requirements. It feels like it's starting to happen here. Right. So if we look back over the last 12 months, what are the things that you've kind of done that I know you told me at the time the importance, but I'm not sure everyone understood why that's going to put you in a good place now. And then maybe looking forward, what are the remaining components that you feel kind of put you in the optimum position to take advantage of your technology?
Yeah, so I think if we look at recycling, what we've been doing in Belfast over the course of the last 12 months, we've continued to develop our supply chain partnerships. We've made products, we've put that into the supply chain. We'll see that in EVs later this year. We've delivered the feasibility study for the commercial plant in Belfast, and now we're submitting on the back of that feasibility study. We've submitted our grant application, and hopefully shortly we'll be in a position where we'll be able to, firm up what the quantum is on that capital package. So I think we've positioned ourselves well in the UK for a UK facility. And on the back of that, we're armed now with a template that we can take to other markets. And, case in point, is probably the ability to move pretty quickly in the US. So we've got a few things bubbling away there. And again, hopefully we're in a position where we can talk about those things shortly. There's a number of opportunities where we're evaluating. And there is a very strong demand in the US. I mean, that's been something we've been working on for 3+ years. But I think what we're seeing now with, the macro geopolitical drivers and this administration, I think we're in a sweet spot to capitalize on, short-term need for US-made magnet rare earths. And then finally, with Brazil and the Viridian joint venture, we set ourselves, some pretty lofty ambitions, and we announced that JV in April last year. And over the course of the last, 15 months, we've taken it from, great idea. We've got stakeholder support. We've had multiple visits from Brazil through Belfast. We've positioned ourselves. We've developed and delivered recycled magnet rare earths into Brazilian supply chain, and we're on the cusp of making real inroads in Poços de Caldas with a technical refining and recycling hub. And hopefully by the end of 2026, we'll be making recycled separated oxides in Brazil. And I think, optically, that's incredibly important and positions us really well with a supportive Brazilian government looking to deploy money and finance value addition. Over the next couple of weeks, end of this week, we should get some clarity from VNDES and FINEP on the financing package. And that is an appreciable amount of funding to secure our facility in Brazil. So, yeah, I think we've made a lot of really positive developments over the course of the last 12 months, and that's starting to be reflected in our share price. We've seen that increase substantially over the last couple of months. The last 4 weeks has been pretty strong, but I think we're just warming up.